A warm greeting to everyone. Welcome to another lecture in this self-knowledge course. Today's topic is titled The Difficult Path and the Christic Work, a subject of vital importance for our progress on the inner path. This path is, without question, difficult. Yet, by understanding beforehand what obstacles make it so, we can move forward with steadiness and achieve the goal of the intimate self-realization of our being within a single existence. The path towards self-realization is indeed difficult. The road that leads to enlightenment is not easy to walk. If it were, most of us would already be awake and enlightened. After all, in many of our past existences, we have already received the teachings of this path. And yet, here we are, still asleep, still lost. There are many reasons why this path is difficult, but the main one, I would say, is that to walk it, we must constantly confront and overcome ourselves, and that is the hardest battle of all. This is why it is called the path of the razor's edge, a path filled with dangers on both sides, where each step brings pain. Many begin this path, but only a few ever reach the goal. Still, despite its difficulty and suffering, this is the only path truly worth taking, because its final destination is total liberation, the complete awakening of our consciousness and our return to the bosom of the common cosmic Father. But this time, having gained wisdom, mastery, and having become creator gods, members of the army of the voice, the great word that resounds throughout the universe. In this lecture, we will understand why the path toward self-realization is so difficult. We will learn about the main obstacles we will encounter once we decide to walk this inner path. We will also see how to transcend these obstacles, and we will discuss how to avoid the many subtle forms of self-deception that can stop us from advancing towards self-realization. So, let's analyze what those obstacles are, the ones that make this path difficult, so we can learn to overcome them and continue progressing in our inner work. The first obstacle we will face is our own ego, especially that dark side of ourselves that we do not know or refuse to accept. As I mentioned earlier, the hardest thing of all is to face ourselves, to make the decision to discover and recognize that we are not as good or pure as we like to believe. To truly know ourselves, we must dare to uncover the perversity that hides within. We love our ego deeply. We justify our mistakes. We overlook many perverse details that arise within us. And we reach such a level of self-deception that we fail to see or acknowledge our own psychological defects. In truth, we know only a very small part of who we are, because our sense of self-observation has become weak from disuse. We have grown accustomed to looking outward, to pointing fingers, criticizing, and judging what others do, without realizing that we are merely projecting that unknown side of ourselves onto other people. But we are not willing to recognize it within our own psyche. And when we carry inside us many things we neither know nor accept, those elements inevitably complicate our lives. As a result, we continually attract situations and people that generate conflict. For if we are not in harmony with ourselves, we cannot be in harmony with others either, and the outcome will always be conflict in one form or another. When we decide to enter the path of self-knowledge, the only path that can truly lead us to enlightenment, we begin to understand the importance of self-observation. Self-observation means bringing the light of consciousness to the dark side of ourselves. As we start to observe, we begin to discover things we never imagined were within us. We realize that we can be liars, lazy, treacherous, unfair, unbalanced, tyrannical, dishonest, cruel, ill-intentioned, weak, perverse, morbid, even degenerate. And as we continue to shed more light upon that inner darkness, we uncover deeper and more disturbing aspects of ourselves, things that frighten us, that cause us through self-pity and excessive self-love to flee from the inner work. This is why many abandon the work of psychological death and turn instead to other paths that promise heaven or enlightenment, simply by believing in something or someone, by attending certain meetings, taking certain substances, or making regular financial offerings to a religion that promises salvation. But, as a famous psychoanalyst once said, no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of their own darkness. And people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Within all that subconscious content lies 97% of our essence. Only by observing our inner darkness, our ego, and eliminating it can we truly rescue and awaken our consciousness, which is light itself. And that is how we achieve true enlightenment. If we do not begin this work of self-discovery through self-observation, we will spend yet another existence believing we are doing well, thinking of ourselves as victims of circumstances and people, always seeing perversity outside, but never recognizing it within. And that brings us to the second aspect that makes this path so difficult: the fact that we refuse to accept that what we criticize so much in others is something that lies hidden in the dark side of ourselves, something we neither know nor wish to recognize. The ego is offended when it sees its reflection. It's important to reflect on this. We will never feel the need to change if we are convinced that the bad one is always the other, that the pervert is the other, that the corrupt are those in government, that the degenerates are those criminals we see on television or online, but that we somehow are innocent and honorable. We rarely want to admit that what disturbs us so deeply in others is simply an aspect of ourselves that we have not yet worked on. We can discover this truth through the fact that we feel no understanding or compassion toward it. That lack of understanding shows that the same defect repressed within us is the one that points, judges, criticizes, and rejects what we see in that mirror, the mirror presented to us through the actions of other people. And this becomes a major cause of stagnation in the inner work, because we end up believing that we don't need to change, that the one who must change is always someone else. When we see something in another person that irritates us, that makes us angry or uncomfortable, let's remember the law of the mirror, which teaches that everything that bothers me, that irritates me, that I wish to change in another, exists within me. Through self-observation, we can begin to search for the hidden defect within, the one that is often repressed by our personality. But as we watch ourselves carefully, we will undoubtedly find many small details showing how that defect manifests constantly through our different centers. Then we can begin to know ourselves, transform ourselves, and ultimately understand and forgive others. The third aspect that makes this path difficult is the fact that it is filled with dangers, both internal and external. When we begin walking this path, we naturally try to separate ourselves from the dark forces that wish to keep us asleep and fascinated, so they can continue feeding on our energy. And when they notice that we seek liberation, then the Black Lodge, both within and outside of us, turns against us. Our own psychological defects, which form our internal Black Lodge, will rise in rebellion. They will generate resistance within us, resistance to doing our practices, to abandoning our harmful habits, to achieving chastity. They will provoke constant desires that we must learn to overcome. As we advance, temptations become stronger and stronger, because only by denying the desires of the ego can we rescue the light and fire trapped within them. The stronger the temptation, the greater the reward we receive when we refuse the desire and eliminate the psychological self. But that inner resistance from the ego is not the only challenge. There are also external attacks. As soon as someone stops fornicating, balances their centers, ignites the sacred fire, and receives their small silver sword in the astral world, the external Black Lodge immediately moves in to take it away. They will try to drain our energy, weaken our will, and turn us once again into another battery of society, so the sinister and parasitic forces can continue feeding on us. These attacks can come in many forms. They may appear as attractive people trying to seduce us, tempting us toward infidelity or back into fornication. They may come as individuals with fascinating theories meant to confuse and mislead us. They may even present themselves as guides, masters, or gurus we are told to follow blindly in order to advance. Or they may come as people who offer us enticing economic opportunities, promising to solve all our problems, but leaving us with no time or energy to do the inner work. That is why we must remain constantly alert, practicing psychological death in every situation, so that our consciousness can manifest and guide us through intuition. We must understand that the external Black Lodge can only tempt us through the internal Black Lodge. What does this mean? It means that if we are eliminating from within ourselves the lustful, unfaithful, fanatical, mythomaniac, intellectual, envious, proud, and greedy eyes, then the external Black Lodge will have no way to seduce us or make us lose our way. Another great obstacle on this path is self-deception. This happens when we enter these studies and begin to feel that we are good people, when we start believing that we are already safe, that we are holy, or that we possess the truth. It also happens when, after learning these teachings, we start to think that just because we can explain them well, we are already better than others, and we may even begin to look down on those who don't yet recognize this knowledge. It often happens that someone begins to work on themselves sincerely. They realize they have many psychological defects, that they must stop wasting their energy, and they begin with courage to do the inner work. They may give up certain vices, eliminate some defects, and even begin teaching others about this path, achieving a degree of inner advancement. But then, little by little, they start to fall into a state of passivity. They begin to feel that they are doing very well, that they are already awake, that they have done what they needed to do, and so they let their guard down. They don't realize that the egos of self-deception are quietly stealing their strength. They lose the inner revolution, stagnate on the path, and eventually all their initial momentum fades away. We must always remember this paradox. On the inner path, when we believe that everything is going very well, things are probably going very badly. And when we feel that things are going badly, that we are failing, struggling, and facing our inner misery, it is often because we are actually progressing very well. Why is that? Because when we think everything is going well, it usually means we have fallen into fanaticism or mythomania. We have lowered our guard, stopped observing ourselves, stopped judging ourselves with sincerity, and therefore we have stopped discovering who we really are. A person who begins to see their own inner darkness, their own corruption, their own inner misery, with the sincere purpose of rescuing the light trapped within that darkness, and who does not hide from it, but instead keeps digging deeper into subtler and more perverse aspects of themselves, will live in a state of constant self-discovery. That is why this work must be continuous. It does not end until it truly ends. The moment we start to feel good, elevated, or superior to others, it is a clear sign that we have gone astray and fallen into self-deception. A person who is truly engaged in self-discovery will grow increasingly aware of how much transformation is still needed, and of how much inner work remains to be done. Even on the second mountain of initiation, the Christic force that is born within us must continue to eliminate the dark aspects of our psychological moon. It must bring an end to the 7 causal selves, the 7 capital defects that gave origin to the entire ego. So feeling that we are great, advanced, or that we are doing wonderfully when we have barely begun this work, that is one of the greatest and most dangerous obstacles to our progress. Another obstacle we encounter on this path is related to moral codes. In society, there are countless moral codes, rules of conduct, civil statutes, norms of civility, and even religious regulations. But when it comes to the inner path, all these codes turn out to be superficial, and many of them can actually become serious obstacles to our inner work. Conventional morality is useless. Morality is always a slave to customs, to time, and to place. What was moral in the past may now be considered immoral. What was moral in the Middle Ages can be immoral today. What is moral in one country is often immoral in another. That's why, once a person begins the work to awaken their consciousness, they must learn to be guided only by their own consciousness. Consciousness is timeless, and it is always objective. Society, for example, tells us that we have to study in order to be someone in life. And following that established code, we spend years, sometimes our entire lives, in basic education, then high school, then university, and later postgraduate degrees, master's programs, specializations, and so on. All of that just to get a job, earn money, enjoy comforts, gain prestige, or collect luxuries. However, all of these are only personality goals. None of them help us develop something permanent or transcendental. Because all material success and achievement is swallowed by time. When we die, everything stays behind. The only thing that transcends time is the consciousness we awaken. So by following this pattern so strongly defended by the moral codes of society, we waste our entire existence chasing subjective things, and we fail to dedicate our lives to their true purpose, the intimate self-realization of the being. Even after receiving this knowledge, many people still put it aside just to comply with those social expectations. We could also analyze other moral codes, such as the idea that the family is the most important thing. When we follow that blindly, we close ourselves off and limit our love to the small circle of our family. We forget that every person on this planet is our brother or sister, and that true love expresses itself through sacrifice for others. Other social codes tell us that we must belong to a specific religion or obey without question the rules imposed by those in power. In this way, countless pre-established codes become obstacles when we try to walk the path of awakening and to follow the inner voice of our being. If we don't make the firm decision to follow the guidance of our own consciousness, beyond what the world or its leaders call right, we will inevitably make many mistakes, some of which can even harm our energy or completely block our process of awakening. Another aspect that makes this path difficult is karma. We owe enormous amounts of it. Every time we've allowed our psychological defects to act instead of our consciousness, they have caused harm, and that harm has left us with countless karmic debts. Throughout our many existences, we have hurt others and committed serious mistakes. If we now wish to free ourselves, we must settle those accounts. Divine law is always just, yet also merciful. It asks us to pay the pending karma from our last 7 existences in order to achieve self-realization. That's why, along this path, we will always be paying karma. Each time we eliminate a psychological defect, we must also pay the debts it created. For that reason, it's vital to live constantly working for humanity, generating dharma, so that through acts of love we can pay our debts in a conscious way, rather than through pain. Sometimes, however, the dharma we create will not be enough, and we will have to go through moments of crisis, illness, pain, or very difficult situations. But we must be clear about one thing. This is a necessary process on this path. It's important to regularly practice the transference of funds and the negotiation with the law, which we studied back in Lesson 13. These practices allow us to pay our karmic debts daily, lighten the weight of our karma, and avoid stagnation along the way. Another difficult obstacle on this path is pseudo-esotericism. In pseudo-esotericism, we find many so-called paths that claim to lead us to higher states through contact with spirits, with extraterrestrials, by taking mystical substances, consulting shamans, sorcerers, or supposed masters, or through the development of psychic faculties and beliefs of every kind. We soon realize that there are countless paths that lead nowhere, and some of them even lead us directly to the abyss and to despair. There are paths that promise to take us to nirvana, to make us majesties of certain regions of the cosmos, and yet none of them can return us to the bosom of the eternal common cosmic Father. We must keep our eyes wide open because many of these paths are extremely fascinating. They may appear pure, holy, even ineffable, but sadly they can only lead to the submerged involution of the infernal worlds. Let us remember that the only path that truly leads us back to the Father is the one we find within ourselves, and we can only enter and advance on that inner path through the daily practice of the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. Along this path, we will inevitably encounter many obstacles, and among them are the trials to which the initiate is constantly subjected. When one enters the path of initiation and begins to work seriously, a series of difficult trials come to test us in every way to see if we deserve to continue ascending. These trials become part of our daily life, for this path demands a rigorous discipline. To pass them, the inner work of psychological death is essential. We will face the trials of earth, water, air, and fire, and we will experience them both in the astral and in the physical world. Through these trials, we are measured by the wisdom, uprightness, and love with which we face the different situations of life, how we respond to economic difficulties, how we adapt to changing circumstances, how we handle the loss of something or someone, or how we deal with moments when lust or anger appear within us. If we become desperate, if we fail to adapt, if we react negatively, We will not pass the trials and will remain stuck on the path, since these experiences define our progress. There are moments of trial when we feel abandoned, when we ask and receive no answer, when we enter an inner desert. But these too are tests of faith, where our capacity to continue walking the path is measured. As we can see, this is a path with many dangers and obstacles. To advance, it is essential to recognize them, understand them, and learn to transcend them. And yet, beyond all these trials, there comes another, and perhaps the greatest obstacle on the path, the moment of choosing the path itself. During the creation of the causal body, we arrive at a decisive point, when after much inner suffering and conscious sacrifice, the Christ within us is ready to be born. Although the Christ is that revolutionary force that descends to help us perform the work of the second mountain, the work of the inner apocalypse, his coming marks the beginning of the truly difficult journey. Before the guardian of the world of will, we must choose. If we do not decide upon the direct, narrow, and demanding path, the individual Christ cannot be born within us. And it is said that of 1,000 initiates who reach that moment of decision, 999 choose the path of nirvana instead of the direct path, thus betraying their inner Christ. The temptation of nirvana is one of the greatest obstacles that appear before those who seek self-realization. The Father can only be reached through the Son, but for the Son of Man to be born in the heart, one must renounce nirvana and decide upon the direct path, uniting the human soul with the divine soul. The Christ is born from this sacred union. The advent of the Christic fire is the most transcendent event in our spiritual life. The intimate Christ then begins to take command of all our mental, emotional, motor, instinctive, and sexual processes as the electronic kundalini ascends. By assuming control over our entire psychology, the Lord of Perfection endures immense and indescribable suffering. Becoming a man among men, he must pass through countless trials and face the most intense temptations. For temptation is fire, and triumph over temptation is light. The initiate, therefore, must learn to live dangerously. That is how it is written. The work of the second mountain is a laborious and profound process, for it is through this inner struggle that the Christic fire purifies us completely and frees us from the ego once and for all. Among the great works that the inner Christ must accomplish on the second mountain are the creation of the bodies of gold, indispensable vessels through which the Christic force can incarnate within us. For the incarnation of the Christ is the essential goal in the advanced stages of the elimination of the pluralized I. He must also pay all karma, even the most severe, the hard karma that can only be paid through pain, since it is related to the transgressions we have committed against the Holy Spirit. Furthermore, he must eliminate the causal eyes, the very seeds of the ego, cleansing our inner stable of all the beasts we have created and nourished through the centuries. And finally, he must also take upon himself the work of teaching humanity. As we can see, the work that the inner Christ must accomplish within us is truly arduous. Yet there is one particular aspect that makes his task even more difficult: the fact that the whole world perceives him through its own psychological lens. Being perfect, he will appear imperfect. Being chaste, he will seem otherwise. Being just, he will appear unjust. It is like the different reflections of light. If we wear blue glasses, everything looks blue. If we wear red ones, everything takes on a red hue. In the same way, although he is pure white light, everyone will see him through the color of their own psychological filters. That is why, though they look at him, people do not truly see him. Each person will project their own defects onto the Christ. No one will understand him. That is why people will judge him, and if they could, they would seek to harm him. The Christ will not conform to moral codes or social conventions. The Christ is the truth, and the truth is always uncomfortable, always offensive to the asleep consciousness of humanity. In truth, if a living Christ were before us, we would not recognize him. Manifest yet hidden within the heart of the true human being, the Christ, taking upon himself all our psychological states, appears to the world as something cruel, immoral, or even perverse, but only because people see him through the darkness of their own minds. The unconscious and sleeping masses want only a historical anthropomorphic Christ, a figure of stone fixed in dogmas that do not challenge their habits or moral complacency. Humanity worships the statue of Christ, but not the living Christ in the heart. The work that the intimate Christ must carry out within our own psyche is profoundly painful. Our inner master must live his entire way of the cross in the very depths of our soul. Yet when the Christ completes his work within us, suffering and persecution will cease. We will have freed ourselves from every form of ego, transcended the laws that once bound us to mechanical existence, and recovered all the wisdom we came to seek through this human experience. We will no longer be slaves of pain or circumstance. Let us therefore reflect on the sacred importance of this path and remember that every obstacle can be overcome, because we are not alone. Our inner being, along with many superior forces from the inner worlds, constantly supports and strengthens us to take each step forward. We invite you to our next lecture, where we will reflect on how to stop identifying ourselves with the events of daily life and why this is so essential for the awakening of consciousness. We will also explore the reasons why we so easily judge others instead of ourselves. We will see how overcoming these two errors allows our consciousness to remain awake and recover true inner judgment. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. Until next time.